Hi, I'm Ztarli and welcome to my video on how I use Artflow. This is part 5, the painting stage. Following on from part 4, we have our shadow layer, highlight layer, flats and lines already done, and we're now ready to enter the painting stage. Now there are two main options on how to do this. One is to actually merge all of your layers and paint on all the layers, so combine your color layer with your line layer and paint over all of it. The second option is to do what I'm doing here to begin with, which is just have your color layers merged together and your line layers separate. If you've done nice, crisp, clean lines, then this is probably the option for you. However, my lines are fat and ugly, so I will be combining all my layers together and painting on all of them, including the lines, so I can fix all the horrible mistakes I've made in the previous steps. In a moment, I am going to merge my line layer to the color layer because it's currently not been merged. But before I do that, I'm just going to give a demonstration on the fuzzy lines from the line art video so you can see what it looks like when you actually have it on top of a colored layer. So I've duplicated the line layer and one of them I've blurred, and then I'm going to change them both to multiply and turn the opacity down on both of them just above half. And you'll see it sort of gives you this warm feeling to the line art. So I kind of like this look, but this is not what I want my finished picture to look like. So I'm going to undo all of this, and then I'm going to change my opacity down just a bit so you can see more of the color underneath, and now merged the lines onto the color layer, and now I'm going to start painting over my lines and making them look better and fixing all of the mistakes that I've made. So the general concept to this is just to choose a painterly brush. So in this case, I've chosen my bamboo brush and I've turned the opacity down just a little bit. And then I just pick colors. So I'm pressing down and using the color picker, and I'll pick like the bottom color or maybe a different color altogether. And I'm just mixing it in with it. So once I place down a bit of color, because the opacity is turned down, it does take on some of the color underneath. And so I'll teardrop that color in between and then mix it back together over top of the other color so that you get a more blended look. I'll also use the smudge tool quite a bit. So if I want a smoother than the painting part, I'll get the smudge tool and I'll sort of smudge those colors in together so they'll be blurred together. But that's essentially what I do, and I just do it over and over and over again all over the whole picture until I'm happy with how it's looking. You can get some really interesting colors by doing things this way. So sometimes it's hard to decide on a color, like if you thinking about reflected light on skin, you're like, well, the light may be blue, but when it touches the skin, it sort of mixes with the skin color, so maybe it comes out purple. For some people, it's easy for you to think about that color and select that color normally, but for me, I find it much more fun and you get more interesting colors if I just went, okay, well, the light is blue, I'll select blue and I'll just turn the opacity down and paint over that skin and see what color it ends up with, and then as I teardrop it and then start painting with that color. And this kind of thing is kind of why the painting part is my favorite part. To me, it's the most experimental part of the picture. So you can experiment with different brushes. So if you want it to look more paintery, so more like a real brush has been used, then you might use a paintbrush that has more texture in it. And this process will allow that texture to be displayed better, so it'll come through more. Or you might want a really soft painted look, so maybe use a blurrier brush. But it's all about just having fun with it and just trying different things, and also letting go of that fear of mucking it up or ruining it, which is one of my biggest hurdles when I started doing this. You really can't do a painterly picture unless everything is merged together And in my early days, I was really afraid of doing that. I was afraid that if I merged all my colors together, what if I then didn't like that color? What if I wanted to make a change to that color? But in reality, you can still change things even though they're all merged together. You can select parts of the picture and cut them off and put them on new layers, or select parts and just change the hue saturation for that part and change the color of it. And you can even just paint over top of a color entirely. And in fact, in this video, there's a part where I've decided I have to paint over the entire jumper because I can't get the texture right with the paintbrush I've chosen. And okay, that took me a long time, but I was really happy with the result at the end of it. So part of this process is to let go of the fear of making mistakes and let them happen, and let yourself learn from those mistakes or to make improvements. A lot of my painting process is actually discovering all the mistakes I have made. I made a pretty big mess of the head. I've been struggling with the face and the mouth for a while, and I finally decided that the head shape wasn't right. So I'm just using the select tool and then the deform selection here, and I'm just adjusting the shape of the head to make it more circular. There's actually several points in this video where I do this kind of thing, so you can still make changes. I do have to paint over the gaps that I make because I've moved the selection, but it wasn't such a big deal. And at the end, I was really happy with how my picture came out. I was actually super happy. I really like how the end result of this picture is. But looking at it right now, it looks pretty ugly. He's got a weird fat face and a weird mouth, and his eyes are all wrong. But during my painting stage, I discover all these mistakes and I fix them. And if you like the cleaner style better, then you probably would have fixed these mistakes earlier on. You would have, used a finer brush for your inking, or spent more time during your inking to make sure the proportions were correct before getting to this stage. But because I know most of my mistakes I will discover while doing the painting stage, and I find that to be kind of fun, and just being able to change such large parts just by painting over them, I find that really enjoyable, which is why I do things this way. But you may want to do them a different way. This is just how I like to draw and paint. Here's a handy tip on how to make your clothes look more realistic, is to give them seams. Every piece of clothing you're wearing at the moment will have a seam on it somewhere, and the light will be hitting those seams, and they are visible. So I always like to reference clothes. So I have hoodies. I think they're really comfortable. So when I was drawing this, I had a look at the hoodie I was wearing, and I looked at where the seams were and I added them in. Same with the pants or the jeans or whatever it is he's wearing. I looked at the pants I was wearing and I looked where the seams were and I drew them in. And with seams, they don't always have to just be a dark line. You can see on his front leg, I've actually highlighted the seam with a light line because that's where the light would have hit that particular fold in the clothing. And it does make clothes look more realistic. So I do encourage you to have a look at your own clothing and think about where the seams or the cuts in the clothing would be, and add those seams into your pictures. You can now see what I was talking about earlier in the video, where I'd used a textured brush to create this jumper, but when I went to paint over it, I discovered I couldn't replicate that texture with the brush I was using. So I got the Smudge Tool and I smudged all the texture into the jumper, and then I just teardropped those colors that I created by smudging them together and just started painting over the whole thing. Although I did like the texture I had on the jumper, I'm actually really proud of how this turned out after I painted back over it. So even though it was kind of like I added a pattern that I didn't end up using, if you weren't going to use the painting stage, you could have still used that pattern. It's just how things turned out when I went to paint it that I removed that texture, but I'm happier with the result that I ended up with here than what I had with the textured jumper before. Now at this stage I thought I was done. I'm actually not done, but I thought I was done. So I added the highest highlight layer. So you can see I've added white touches to the tail, horns and hair and the wingtips, just to add an extra high shine to make those parts of the drawing look shiny. And there's also a little bit of shine in the eye. I also then try and add some distance or focus to the picture. So the first one, I duplicate the whole picture and blur it, and then I erase parts of that blurred layer so you can see the rest. So you can sort of focus on parts of it, so it looks like you've got a camera and you're focusing in on parts of it. The other way you can try create focus is to have a layer and color part of that layer a dulled out color or a lighter color to sort of give that idea of distance from the camera. Like, there's the further things are away, like far away mountains, the less you can see the color in them and the definition in them. So that's what I was trying to achieve with those two different types of layers. But ultimately, after looking at this picture for a while, I decide it's actually not done, and I have to return to it and fix the parts that were irking me, that were sort of staring at me, telling me that they still weren't right, and I had to fix them. This picture took me about 2.5 hours to complete fully from start to finish, and about 1 hour and 20 of that time is spent purely on the painting stage. That doesn't include the background or any of the shadow and highlight stages that came before it. And you can spend as little or as much time on the painting stage as you like. If I'm doing a proper speed paint, then I'll spend less time on the painting part, but I'll actually use like a larger brush and make broader, quicker strokes, and sort of pick lighter and darker colors, and they just won't be as gradual in between colors, so they just won't be mixed in as much. But sometimes I'll spend much longer on the painting stage, and on some of my more refined pictures I've spent 10+ hours on the painting stage, and the results I think are very good. I like how those pictures come out, but I don't have as much time in my days as I used to, and I'd like to do more art, so I do prefer to stick to the stage, this sort of quicker paint style that I do, sort of a middle ground, where my pictures take between 1 hour to 3 hours, and I'm still quite happy with the end result. It might not be as refined as some of my other stuff, but I'm still happy with how the picture looks. So now just fixing up those last few things that were still irking me. So I didn't like the positioning of the leg or the angle of the leg. So I'm now repositioning the whole leg. And then to fix the humongous gaps where I've cut the leg and repositioned the leg, I actually create a new layer underneath, and I first paint sort of like a flat area, paint in all the flat areas to join the pieces together. Then I'll merge those two layers together and then go back and paint over them to smooth the more harsher transitions. Usually before I make a huge change like this, I will actually copy the original layer in case I want to return to the original form of the picture. So I'll copy it, I'll do all the changes on the secondary layer, and then if I'm happy with those changes, I delete the original layer and just work on the second layer, then becomes the main picture again. But we're in the home stretch now. This is done. I've finished with my painting stage for the character. So the next stage will be the final video, which is backgrounds. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!